next person we're going to hear from tonight is Brett, I think. Yep, Brett is giving us the perspective of a man person. So let me tell you a little bit about Brett. Brett is a naturopath and also a member of our local community. He founded Elemental Life Naturopathy with clinics in Upwey and Ferntree Gully. Brett was not always a naturopath and spent the first part of his working life, some 20 plus years, as a chief financial officer, business manager, company director and consultant for various companies and not-for-profit organisations and trusts. Brett's life took an unexpected turn when his third child, a son, was born with an undiagnosed life-threatening illness. This event proved to be a massive catalyst for change in Brett's life. His baby continued to rapidly lose weight after birth. The situation was dire, but Brett was unable to find assistance from the conventional healthcare providers of medical practitioners and or medical specialists. His son's case was deemed untreatable, so Brett began his own research into the treatment options to save his baby's life. In desperation, he flew to Orlando, Florida, to seek traditional Chinese medicine specialists. This was followed by a stay in a dedicated live-in treatment clinic in Adelaide under the care of a paediatric therapy team, including paediatric dieticians, occupational therapists, speech pathologists, and an integrative paediatrician. Brett's frustration with the focus on managing symptoms rather than finding and treating the cause of his son's illness fostered a passion for clinically relevant, evidence-based research in natural medicine. His baby son is alive and well today because Brett directed this insight and his newly found interest in natural treatment and disease prevention, and also decided to go back to study at the Southern School of Natural Therapies. He completed a Bachelor of Health Science degree in naturopathy and started his own practice that focuses, perhaps unsurprisingly, on healthcare for children and young people. His approach to healthcare includes empowering children and young people to make healthy choices for themselves, based on understanding their bodies and learning to self-manage their own health as much as is possible. Brett is a father to 3 energetic children and has a background in junior sport coaching and speaking and training engagements both in Australia and overseas, as well as a prior life as a senior instructor with the Royal Life Saving Society of Australia. So that's Brett. Here's the clicker. There's the clicker. Hasn't worked yet.
And interestingly enough, I'm not going to talk about naturopathy or biochem or anything like that. Probably feel a bit vulnerable being the only guy up here talking, but we're going to lean into the discomfort, see how we go. I'm not going to defend violence. I'm not going to defend men. I'm not going to defend perpetrators in general. I might challenge if the abuse is always physical when we talk about violence. I might challenge if men are always the perpetrators of abuse. I might challenge whether violence and abuse is always external. And I might challenge us to look a little bit deeper than generalisations about men. So it's interesting, I pulled up some quotes that are up there that we often hear, like father, like son. The bottom two, he was always a loner. Boys will be boys. I know Imogen had put up an article on Facebook that we had a little bit of a debate about the quote. We did, yes. Choices are made within a wider patriarchal context that privileges men's needs and interests over those of women and children. And with the Queensland incident last week, there was one on the news that I read, not that I'm saying Rowan is a victim, but Rowan has been raised by a father and his father and his father, and it goes onwards. So I did some thinking about contributing factors that are fairly commonly discussed about violence, and we talk a lot about role models and peers, video games and TV shows, sports, guns, access to things like that, social media that we've talked about tonight. I guess growing up as a child, a lack of emotional development, men don't talk about feelings. And then from my point of view, there's biochem, epigenetics, nutrigenomics factors. There's also things about self-worth that we've mentioned and self-esteem. So I came to the conclusion that we're a combination of everything and everyone that we have ever interacted with in our life. And I thought, why don't we take a look at me? I went to a private all-boys school from grade 5 through to year 12 that had, you would say, a strong culture of bullying from both students and teachers. It was very centric, being a boys' school, on activities like football and cricket that I was never involved in. So you kind of grow up unseen, invisible, bullied. And it was also an epicentre for abuse and pedophilia. I was taught by 6 Christian brothers and teachers, and between them, last time I looked, there was 120 plus convictions. So I guess in challenging a few things in my upbringing, there was probably a lot of gaslighting that went on. For those that don't know what gaslighting is, we talk about challenging your own perception of what's happening. Did that happen? Didn't it happen? You're making it up. You're exaggerating things. There's probably some elements of passive aggressiveness, especially in the school environment, from both teachers and students. Emotional neglect, probably also both at school and at home. With, I guess, in the era that I grew up, we didn't talk about feelings, emotions were suppressed. There was elements of conformity at school, and to be a male, to be a boy, to fit in, to do what everyone else was doing. And then from my own personal background, I'm a twin, so there was always a lot of comparison. My twin I've got a sister, so comparing developmental stages of life. Why aren't you like this? Why aren't you like this? And that kind of all has an impact, especially on kids, that they're not you're not fostered to develop at your own speed. You're not fostered to be your own personality. And I put that little quote up the bottom that we always hear: sticks and stones will break my bones, but names will never hurt me. Like a bone generally takes 6 to 8 weeks to heal. The emotional abuse, whether it's male, female, whoever the perpetrator is, takes a lot longer. My other passion is sport. Archery is a sport. Again, not cricket, not football. So from a schooling point of view, I didn't really exist. I started shooting when I was 11. I shot my first competition when I was 12. Interestingly, a little tangent point about that competition, we talk about self-worth and self-esteem in kids and what that does to them growing up. My very first tournament that I shot in, they had the junior shoot in the morning and the adult shot in the afternoon. Now, I don't know whether it's stupidity on my behalf or whether I like a challenge, but I actually decided that I would shoot both the juniors and the seniors. My dad was shooting in the seniors, so I had to be there anyway. And I kind of think that if we're going to improve ourselves, to hang around with people that are better than us, we can learn from them. So I shot the adults in the afternoon and actually won both the juniors and the seniors, which wasn't really expected from me. Where we talk about self-worth and self-esteem, when they were doing the medal presentations and I stood up on the podium, everyone booed. You kind of, as a junior, you question, well, why? In the car on the way home, you ask why, and it's, oh, don't worry about it, that's just them. That doesn't really lead to emotional development. It doesn't lead to processing feelings. You can quit and say, well, I'm not going through that again. Or you can kind of look inwards and say, well, this is something that I want to do. How do I work through that? Probably a little bit the same with comparison, being a twin, that my sister took up the sport. Even though we're shooting in different competitions and different divisions, there was always the comparison that your sister came second at this tournament. How come you came third? Or how come you came fourth? Without the context of coming third out of 40 people versus coming second out of 3 people. And again, none of that is processed when you question it. It's dismissed. Don't worry about it. So it was kind of an interesting, I guess, sporting choice to start with, but also working through that sport to state teams and national teams and having the persistence to do it. I kind of look back and think, well, why did I have the persistence to do that given everything that was going on? So my next slide, I kind of went down looking at perception is reality, and does our perception empower us or does it empower others? I think if the perception of what was happening empowered other people at school or it empowered other people in sport, I might have quit, I might not have wanted to go to school. But if life is about perception, both positive and negative, whatever we choose reflects our outcome. And that, I guess I started thinking about whether self-worth is tied to others' perceived value in us, or is it something that's derived internally? Do we do things for ourselves, or do we do things to impress other people? Do we have a need for external validation? Now, between school and life, I've had 15 friends suicide due to abuse and trauma, and I'd have to say it's probably a 50-50 split between males and females, which gets back to my previous point as to whether violence is always external. If it's not external, where do we direct it? So I keep coming back to our next slide, that if we're a combination of everything and everyone we have ever interacted with, and these are the contributing factors that are widely talked about with role models and peers. Like I have a father, I had male educators, video games, TV shows, sports, guns, all of the ones that we talked about before. Actually, I was reading an article yesterday on video games and the pros and cons of those contributing factors, down to the point of character, personality, player mode, introversion and conscientiousness playing a role in the outcome of those. Image and I kind of looked at it a little bit and went, what went wrong? I was educated by perpetrators of abuse. I grew up with gaslighting. I grew up with dismissiveness of feelings and emotions. I have social media accounts. I do watch TV. I do play video games with my kids. I'm not too bad with a bow and arrow. I am an introvert, and I'm a minority from a work perspective. And in a world of generalisations, what should I be if we are a product of everything that we've grown up with and interacted with? But I'm not. I'm a naturopath, I'm a nutritionist, I'm a dad to 3 kids. And I just kind of pose the question as to why.